Welcome back to the Kino Cave, everybody, and that door is open. Fuck it, that's the take I'm using. And today, the Kinospective is back, and today is the turn of an MCU movie that people choose to forget. The Incredible Hulk is always the one that people tend to forget. This is the one that people choose to forget. They ignore it. Thor: The Dark World. So I've only watched this film 3 times in my life because I bought into the idea that this is the worst MCU movie and by far the worst Thor movie. But it does kind of baffle me sometimes that people continue to have this as their worst MCU movie ever, because I get it in terms of the Infinity Saga from Iron Man all the way to Avengers Endgame. I understand putting this at the bottom, especially after my most recent watch. But this is still much better than the likes of Quantumania or even another Thor movie coming up that I won't get to in this series of videos, but maybe further down the line. So I watched this film for the first time when I was going through all the MCU movies that I'd never seen when I got big into the MCU as a teenager. Then I did a big rewatch of every single one before Avengers Infinity War came out, so I watched it again for that. And the third time was a week or so ago for this video. Now, while I think this is far from the worst MCU movie at this point, and I actually don't even think it's the worst Thor movie, this is still a huge step down. This is the worst movie so far in the MCU, and I think that's probably why people continue to hold contempt in their heart for this movie, because this was seen as a massive step down from a franchise that had been putting out kind of hit after hit. Even, people didn't love Incredible Hulk or the first Thor, or even Iron Man 3, people generally still liked the MCU, and obviously off the hype of the Avengers only a year previous, people bought into all this hype, and to see a movie that just wasn't that great, I think really kind of kicked people. Though, I do see some people have this at like half a star on Letterboxd, saying it's a terrible movie. That's an insane overreaction, but I will get to that in my review. So getting into the behind the scenes info, it is very clear from the behind the scenes info on this movie, and we're about to see this trend begin, I think, where Kevin Feige is the loudest voice and the most common voice in the behind the scenes interviews. He's the one talking about all the creative decisions that they were making. It's his voice at the forefront at this point, and there's barely any of Alan Taylor's voice in these behind the scenes interviews. I think that says a lot as well about his voice in the film itself, and it's interesting because while I don't hate Kevin Feige, it might come across that way sometimes, I actually love seeing the reduction of his hairline as these movies go on. I do think that he maybe bit off a lot more than he can chew with the MCU, and I think he's made some decisions. Trying to seize control of the MCU has really worked out for the worst, not only for the franchise, but for himself as well. He's not, doing the best he can because he's just overloading himself with work. And I think we're starting to see the beginning of that here. He is taking the reins of creative control over each individual project. Something like that is fine when you're putting out 1 movie a year as an executive producer, but we're already jumping to 2 movies a year. Soon we'll be at 3 movies a year for this franchise or cinematic universe. So on to the behind the scenes info about the actual story of this movie. Kevin Feige, as well as Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston, wanted to show more of the moral ambiguity when it came to Loki, because he was a straight villain in the Avengers. So they wanted to come back to Loki being this more ambiguous character in terms of he's not this awful, heartless villain. He's a victim himself in a lot of ways, and they wanted to explore that more in this movie, especially through his relationship with Thor. Thor and Loki's relationship in this movie is fantastic, and they really do explore them as brothers who grew up instilled with this sense of being a leader and being a hero, but they've gone on completely different paths trying to reach that goal. So this is a weird one, but to give Thor and Loki a reason to team up, they had to create something insane to kind of draw them together. And Feige decided to go with the death of their mother, Frigga, I think it was. My Norse mythology isn't... I haven't brushed up on it recently. So they wanted to use their mother's death as a catalyst to get them together on this revenge mission. And this is a clear example of what in media is called fridging. And I'm blanking on what the origin of this term is and why it's called that, because it's one of those themes like jumping the shark or flanderization, where it's based on a specific example. But what fridging is to get your hero, usually male, to give him a motivation to do the things that he does in the movie. They often have to kill off a character that's close to that hero, who is usually female. You see this a lot. It's Bruce Wayne's parents, it's John Wick's wife and dog. It's plastered all over media. You can see it everywhere. For Peter Parker, it's Uncle Ben. Even in something like The Shawshank Redemption, which doesn't use a female character, the catalyst for Andy Dufresne to get out of prison is for the kid that he helped get his high school equivalency is shot. Fridging happens in most pieces of media as a way to motivate the hero to do the things that he does. And it's weird to have such an egregious and obvious example of this in this movie, because it's almost comical how obvious it is as an example of fridging. Like, we'll kill the hero and villain's shared mother so that they can team up on a revenge quest. Because it can be done well, like in John Wick. It's a very obvious one in John Wick as well. But John Wick is just such a well-made movie that you don't really care, and it wears its heart in its sleeve. But I feel like with Thor and Loki in this movie, they try to make it more subtle than that, maybe, and make it deeper than it is. This very outdated and often misogynistic trope of killing a female character to motivate a male character. I don't know how to feel about it. It's interesting. But of course then, something I do enjoy is that the film ends with Thor and Loki reaching their goals. And that was an intent as well from Kevin Feige and company, to have each of our characters become the people that they've wanted to be since the very first Thor movie. Loki finally gets to be king, and like justly king. And Thor wanted to be a hero and a protector of Asgard. Originally he wanted to do that through being king and going into battle and ruling over the Nine Realms. But now he realizes that it's not being king he wants to go out and fight for Asgard in the battlefield as a protector. Both of our main characters of this franchise have now reached their goal. A decision that Alan Taylor was a part of, and something that he enjoyed about this movie, was switching it up from the first Thor movie by having Jane be the fish out of water on Asgard. So in the first Thor movie, it was Thor falling to Earth and being the fish out of water there, and there's a lot of comedy and also intrigue to be had from that. And now it's reversed, it's on its head. Thor is showing Jane around Asgard. Jane is trying to figure out all the different Asgard technology and all that kind of thing, and she's discovering this world. And I think that is a good way to keep things fresh, that so that we're not just doing the same movie again, even though we are kind of, it still feels fresh. So the production designer and the visual effects team wanted to bridge the gap between sci-fi and supernatural in this movie. They wanted it to feel like what we would have seen as magic back in the times of the Vikings was actually just their version of technology. This is often seen through like Jane figuring out how some of the Asgard stuff works. Even though it looks like magic, she figures it out. It's like, I can't remember the term she uses because it's a complicated sciencey term. But she figures out what it is based on what it's doing. I do find it interesting though how when people describe how the magical elements of Thor is actually just science, and the Asgardians don't realize that, because then obviously we get to like the Guardians of the Galaxy movies and it's all kind of explained away with magic. But there is still undoubtedly magic in Thor's world, because Loki is magic and his mother was magic and she taught him to use magic. And that's not technology, that is just actual magic. That's a power that they have. And Thor's magic because he can conjure thunder and lightning from out of nowhere. So there is still definitely an element of magic to Thor's world. The way they designed Asgard as well is like an ancient city that the higher up it goes, the more modern it gets. So what I also like about this movie is that more of Asgard is explored. And when they're in the lower levels, it's very much like kind of old, ancient kind of catacombs and and ancient looking buildings and that kind of thing. Stuff that looks like it's been standing for thousands of years. But then you get up into the main palace and some of the buildings on top when you get that great wide shot of Asgard itself, and the stuff that's higher up is way more advanced. So for when Stellan Skarsgård is doing his little naked run around, Stellan himself decided to walk around his house naked for a while, just to see if he could, to use his words. And that is the level of acting that I expect from today's actors. Fuck Jared Leto pretending he's in a wheelchair, or sending people to use condoms and dead pigs. That actually happened, look it up. Fuck all of that. Stellan Skarsgård, he is committed. And on to the review portion of this video for Thor: The Dark World. How do I feel about the supposed worst Marvel movie in the Infinity Saga? I don't agree with that sentiment especially, but I will say this is by far the worst one so far. And this movie is honestly just fine. It's mediocre, it's got some good stuff in it, but it's really boring at some point, and structurally this movie's fucked. Like, I found it really strange watching this because it gets really, really slow and really, really fast at certain points, and it just does not make for a good feeling. You know, when you watch a well-paced movie and it just goes by in a clip, and you, even if it's a slow burn movie, like say Alien or The Shawshank Redemption, you don't really feel it. You don't feel that it was 2 hours, 2.5 hours, because it just, the pacing carries it. This movie was 2 hours that felt like 4. So for the first act, it goes on for like an hour investigating this ether thing and leading up to Frega's death and all that kind of thing. Then we race to the Dark World for a scene, and then Loki fucking bites it, and then we have to race to London for a big action scene at the end with some comedy thrown in there because we've got Kat Dennings here, who I love, by the way, and I still think that she's really funny in this movie because it's Kat Dennings and she's awesome. Anyway, on to the villain, Malekith. I like Christopher Eccleston. I especially like him as a villain, especially in 28 Days Later. If this was more like 28 Days Later in terms of his performance in this villain, it'd be incredible. But unfortunately, Malekith is just kind of a wet sock of a villain. His motivation is just, he wants to make the world dark again because he's mad at Odin. He's Laufey from the previous movie. And Laufey was not a deep villain, he was a cackling supervillain. But Malekith isn't even that. It's Christopher Eccleston giving a very subdued performance for a very boring villain. And all of that would have been fine if, say, the villain said something about our hero. Like, you know, does Malekith tell us anything about Thor? But he doesn't. It's just very, very basic. And yeah, I just could not get on board with Malekith. He's got a cool looking design, I'll give him that. You know, it's kind of a cool dark elf design. He does genuinely look like a Lord of the Rings elf, but evil. Like, it's like they turned it negative or something like that. But yeah, that's literally it. I cannot think of anything more to say about this guy. I barely remember any of his scenes. Also, Anthony Hopkins is really phoning it in at this point, even though this is the second movie that he's in and not the last. So that's kind of insane. But yeah, I think he's realized at this point that nobody cares about whether or not he gives a good performance. He just needs to shout some Nordic sounding shit and people will still show up and pay for it, because these movies are not interested in getting the best performance possible out of these characters. It's purely a fucking fluke that they got some of the best actors in the world at the time to be in these movies. Like, because if you look at Stellan Skarsgård in anything except this, he's incredible. If you look at Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston in anything else but Marvel movies, they're great, full of charisma. Natalie Portman, her career speaks for itself. Kat Dennings is hilarious in like every other comedy thing that she's in. She's like the best part of Two Broke Girls. But so it becomes obvious then that these movies don't have the best writing when Anthony Hopkins is there just completely... It looks like he's reading his lines. He's Marlon Brandoing it the fuck up in this movie. I hate to drag him. Like, I love Anthony Hopkins so much. He's an incredible actor, but he clearly just gave up at this point. In terms of visuals, this film attempts to reflect Kenneth Branagh's Thor. Very much tried to follow on from that. but it just lacks, I think, the beating heart of Kenneth Branagh's visual eye, his vibe. I hate to talk about it so vaguely, but it's hard to kind of break all of this down. But Kenneth Branagh's movies just have this ethereal kind of magical quality to them, which is why he lends himself to Shakespearean style stuff so well. Like if you look at Thor or Cinderella, or even go back to his movies in the 90s with his fucking Frankenstein movie, there is this old school feeling to it, like a fairy tale feeling to it, that is just not captured here at all. Everything is so plain. There's no kind of extreme use of color to demonstrate the fairy tale quality. There's not this kind of bright light in the movie. Everything just feels empty and lifeless. The Dark World itself, I'll put the name of the place up here because I ain't even trying that. Svartal something, Fartal, whatever. The Dark World is an ugly and fairly uninteresting place, which is crazy because they filmed it in Iceland, which it's a really interesting looking place, like, because they've got this sort of molten black rock, but then it is covered in ice, which is white. So the behind the scenes footage of this place looks better than it does in the movie, where they color graded the fuck out of it and made it look so green and gray with very little contrast. It's just not good to look at. I would rather this mix of white, like black rock with white sleet over it, and using heavy lighting contrasts to make this world feel black and white. I mentioned this in the behind the scenes, but I really enjoyed seeing more of Asgard in this movie, than just the main palace, which we saw in the first Thor. It was great to explore Asgard more, and considering what happens to it in the next Thor movie, it was nice to just hang out there for a minute. Also, it was fun to see a superhero movie that takes place somewhat on Earth and not have it be set in America somewhere. It's cool to have the backdrop be a place in Europe for once, even if it is just London, so it looks kind of like a James Bond movie at times. And also, as an Irishman, it's always fun to see London get destroyed in a movie. Speaking of Irishmen, Chris O'Dowd is in this. Moving in more to the positive side of things now, the best thing in this movie, by far, is Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston. I don't even know if I can come up with the words to describe how incredible they are in this movie and in the MCU as a whole. They carry these characters through what is often mediocre writing. More of that in the next Thor movie I will talk about. But here, they just feel like brothers. Like, I have one older brother, so some of these conversations just feel like conversations I had with him growing up and stuff when I was a kid and he was a teenager, and then we got a little older and stuff like that. Some of it cut fucking deep in terms of just like the sarcastically bitching at each other and stuff like that. Goddamn. This might actually be their best performance as Thor and Loki, respectively. I'm not even making that up or making a joke. This could be their best performances as these characters, because they've just got it at this point. They've nailed it down. They know what the dynamic is, and they've just got it. They haven't been turned into meme lords yet. Now, bear in mind, I haven't seen the Loki TV show. Maybe Tom Hiddleston is better than that, but in a Thor project where Thor and Loki are in it together, I think this is the best of the best. So overall, this is a passable film that is carried by its central performances. The budget of this movie was $150 million, which is pretty much the standard for a superhero movie at that point in time, because obviously the DCEU was kicking off this year as well, and we have big franchises that are still going. This movie made $644 million at the box office, which for a movie that people claim that they hate, that is a hefty chunk of change for a big blockbuster movie like this. Proving once again, I say this every time at this point, the MCU is a freight train that is non-stop at this point. And that is it for Thor the Dark World, guys. Let me know what you thought of this video in the comments down below, and let me know what you think of Thor the Dark World now. Has your perspective on it changed? Has your opinion softened on this movie like mine has over the years? Because I think I did find an appreciation for some things in this movie when rewatching it, but I'd still not rush back to watch it again. And of course, the next MCU movie we're talking about is Captain America the Winter Soldier, so that's going to be a crazy one because we're jumping from like the worst to the best here in terms of the Infinity Saga. So stick around for that, guys. Give this video a like if you liked it. Subscribe to see more from the Kinospective and more content in general. Halloween is rearing its beautiful head. We're almost through the summer. It's about to get hot again in Ireland this week, and I am dreading it. But it'll be okay, because the spooky season is nearly upon us. I hope you all have a great day, everyone. I'll see you at the movies.